All right, good morning.
Good morning.
This morning we're going to be in Genesis chapter 37. Just turning there, I have to let you know my parents are here this morning. You get a chance to introduce yourself. They've heard a lot about this class, the people in it. They're in town this weekend because yesterday we got to celebrate our little boy Brooks turning 4. Got to go down to Ocean Adventures on the coast and see the dolphins. That was really cool, by the way. If y'all haven't done that, it's a pretty awesome experience. The dolphins put on a show, and you get to pet stingrays, and you get to feed the birds. Nobody got pooped on, which is great. Really cool experience, though. It's a lot of fun. Your son turning 4, Brooks, this 4 years have absolutely flown by. It's crazy. He loves the Bulldogs. He loves the Eagles. He somehow loves the Baltimore Orioles, too. You know, yeah, and Arkansas, I don't know what happened. It's really terrible that he's really getting interested in sports right now and watching, and the Yankees are just abysmal to watch. Like, it's really unfortunate right now. But anyways, Genesis 37. As we start today and as we study this chapter, I want us to be mindful of God's ultimate plan of redemption. This chapter plays a vital role in that. We're going to be introduced to Joseph. And this is really the beginning of the closing of the book of Genesis. This really marks the beginning of the end of Genesis and will launch us even into the rest of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And so before we begin, we're going to backtrack and we're going to kind of look at how we got to this point. Genesis 12, as we remember, it says, "Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So God calls Abraham. God has chosen Abraham to make him a great nation. And this is solely based on the grace of God to establish his people. God didn't choose Abraham for his obedience, but the grace of God became the foundation of Abraham's obedience. It was nothing that he did. And we see even here that this is not just something that's nationalistic, but this is a global cause. That end of verse 3, in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. God promised to bless Abraham so that he and the nation that comes from him will be the means by which his divine blessing will go to the rest of the world. And then we would move on from there, and we see the formal covenant that he offers Abraham in chapter 15. Verse 13, it says, "Then the Lord said to Abram, know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. As for yourself, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a good old age, and they shall come back here, and the 4th generation of the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete." So who knows what God's talking about here? Where will these people be afflicted for 400 years?
Egypt.
That's right. So we see the initial event today in this chapter of the people of Israel going to Egypt and how they get there. It starts with Joseph. And also in this passage, we see a theme that's going to go throughout all of Scripture, and that's the fact that suffering precedes glorification. That the people of God were called to suffer. Even us as believers are called to suffer. This world is not an easy place for those who tell the rest of the world the way you're living's wrong, that there's only one way to peace and happiness and ultimately salvation. People don't like to hear that. So we're called to suffer even today. Through many trials, we enter the kingdom of God. So again, God has prophesied that the people of Abraham, the people of Israel, will suffer for 400 years. It's really hard to comprehend how many people were born, lived a full life, and died in that affliction. Never saw the hope that was promised them of the promised land. And even, fast forwarding to the New Testament, when Christ says he's coming again, how many people have lived a full life and died without seeing the return of Christ? And how many more people will do that? We don't know when God will fulfill his promise, but we know that he always will. So we fast forward now, we've gone through from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, and now here we are at Joseph. Joseph is the oldest son of Jacob, born by his favorite wife, Rachel. His story is kind of characterized by his humiliation and his exaltation, and we can't help but see something of Jesus in that story too. Joseph is often described as a type of Jesus. He's a dreamer. God gave him the gift of interpretation. As I said, he's seen as a type of Christ. He was beloved by his father. He went through great suffering and affliction. He was eventually exalted over his brothers. And so as we look at this passage, if someone will read for us, chapter 37, verses 1 through 4.
Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Jacob, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wife, and Joseph brought a bad report to them, their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was a son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his other brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him.
All right, thank you. So we see in verse 2, it says, these are the generations of Jacob. So this is marking, wrapping up the story of Jacob. It's no longer about him. It's going to be about his descendants. And really, the most prominent figure is Joseph. We're going to study him more than any of the other offspring throughout the rest of this book. And that's just, it's also how Jacob was the prominent figure in the account of his father, Isaac. So who here has siblings? Show of hands. Multiple siblings. I want y'all to be honest. My parents are here, so I'll be honest too. At any point in your life, did you ever feel like your sibling was the favorite child? Yeah, obviously. And if you're not raising your hand, it's because you were the favorite child. Like, that's just how it is. Yeah, Whitney was the favorite child. I'll raise my hand. My little sister was definitely the favorite child, still is. That's just how it is. That's reality. Also, for those of us who have multiple kids, we're lying. We obviously have a favorite child. My son is the favorite. My daughter's a problem. Like, she just is. That's a joke. I promise. It's a joke. I love them both equally. That's true. It's great. But anyways, we see here Jacob has a favorite, and it's Joseph. He thought of him higher than any of his other children. He treated him differently than the rest of the children. And any time that happens, obviously, it's going to cause a rift in the family. And he was despised, absolutely despised by his brothers. They hated him. I can think back on my childhood. My sister was not the favorite. That was a story. If whatever spats me and my sister were going through, there was never a point of absolute hatred. Obviously there are people who have different stories and different backgrounds and have real conflict within the families. It's something we never experienced. We were very blessed in that. And I couldn't imagine what either side was going through. The brothers, even though their hatred was directed towards Joseph, I think some of that had to go to Jacob as well as the father. As Stephen taught us last week, at this point, Jacob's kind of just there. He's not really being a dad. He just kind of exists as a father in name only. And it had to be a really tough childhood for Joseph growing up. It says right there that at the end of verse 4, it says that they could not speak peacefully to him. Could you imagine, whatever setting or context they grew up in, that there's not even a head nod, what's up, man, how's it going? Or a, hey, how you doing today? What's going on? Like, nothing. Could not utter a word of peace to the guy. And for those of us who have siblings, could you think back to a time where, you and your sibling were got in a fight and you just didn't speak for weeks? Like, that just didn't happen. I can't imagine getting to that point. So, as we see here, Jacob made this decision to make Joseph his favorite child. And, the incidents that unfold because of this are really on him. And it's pretty disastrous what the consequences are. All right, so moving on. Could somebody read for us verses 5 through 11? Chapter 37, 5 through 11.
Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us, or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind.
All right, so if your brothers hate you, it's probably not a great idea to tell them that one day you're going to rule over them and they're going to bow down to you. Twice, right? And then to tell your father or mother, like, yeah, hey, one day you're going to worship me. Man, that's did not make matters any better. So he shares this dream that he has. The crazy thing is, this isn't just a dream. Like this is prophecy. God was giving him a prophecy because, as we know later in the story of Joseph, how he gets to Egypt, the suffering that he goes through, the act he performs in interpreting Pharaoh's dream, and then is exalted to number 2 over the entire kingdom of Egypt. Like, this does actually come true. It wasn't just a dream. It wasn't something he came up with. God gave him this prophecy. But in the immediate, we see that his brothers are absolutely outraged. They hated him for this. They couldn't stand for it. They feel like they had to do something. And we even see a small rebuke from Jacob. And in one of the commentaries I read, that last part in chapter 11, he kept the saying in mind. A lot of people believe that he was actually thinking of the birthright at that point. that even Jacob, as his youngest child, that he was going to bestow that birthright because he was his favorite and the double portion to him. And he was starting to reconsider that because of the dream that he had.
Little did Jacob know there'd be nothing to give.
Absolutely nothing. Yeah. So, and you got to think back to Jacob's life too, and and what he did in deceiving his father, kind of stealing that birthright, and did he really hold it in that high of a regard too, that he was placing it on his youngest son? So we see a lot of similarities right there. So moving on, beginning in verse 12. So the brothers are even more outraged. Their disdain grew even more. We're going to see the result of this now in verse 12. So now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." And he said to him, Here I am. So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering in the fields, and the man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I'm seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where are they pasturing the flock?" And the man said, "They have gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. They saw him from afar, and before they came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, throw him into the pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of the robe of many colors that he wore. And they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty, and there was no water in it. So we see in this passage that Joseph, the beloved son, is being sent out by his father. He's going in search of his brothers, and they see him from far away, and they think, now's our chance. Dad's not around, nobody's around. We can't stand this guy. We got to put an end to it. And they conspired right there to kill him. Also, man, just getting to that point of someone who's your sibling to wanting to end their life, how far do you have to go to bring yourself to that? It's not very virtuous guys, the sons of Jacob. And we can't help but see the similarities here. We have Joseph. He shares a prophecy with a group of people, and they don't like what they hear. And so they say, we have to put an end to this. We have to put an end to it now. And if we fast forward to the New Testament, we see Jesus Christ, who has a prophecy about himself, the Son of Man, and a group of people, and the Pharisees and the Sadducees say, we have to put an end to this. And what both parties didn't realize was that they weren't destroying the dreams of the prophecy. They were actually fulfilling them. Both instances, trying to kill Joseph, the murder of Jesus Christ, was the fulfillment of God's plan all along. This is what he had in mind. So they devised a plan to murder him, and they thought that was going to be the end of it. The Pharisees, the Sadducees devised a plan to murder Jesus. They thought that was going to be an end of it. Move on past the New Testament, the Roman Empire. All throughout time, people have been trying to end the spread of the gospel and the prophecy of God, and the church is still here. God's prophecy does not end. His prophecy cannot be destroyed. His plan is true. And what these guys didn't know at that time when they were trying to kill their brother in this dream is that God's plans always come true. His prophecy always comes through. So one of the brothers, Reuben, steps in. He tries to save Joseph. Tries to reason with his brothers, and his purpose was, look, if they don't kill him, they just throw him in the pit. I can come back later, save his life, return him to the father. Maybe that relationship could be restored since I brought his favorite son back home. Who knows? But it's better than just killing him. So they beat him, ripped the robe off him, which again was the sign of his father's favor. And they throw him in the pit. And I think that symbolized more with the brothers. I think it was more about their envy and their jealousy than their hatred of him. I think they wanted to be him. I think they wanted their father's affection, and I think they wanted his favor. I don't think it was just hatred towards Joseph. I think it had a lot to do with Jacob. So we see instead of killing him, they decided side against it, and they just threw him in the pit. Any thoughts or comments before we move on?
He's just like 17, you know?
Right.
Or at least
Yeah.
when he started
Yeah.
at 37,
Uh-huh.
so maybe there's been, I don't know.
Yeah.
But like, that's like a junior in high school. Like,
Right.
think about how we were like silly and sometimes idiots. You
Yeah.
know, and so you just see him being a little immature and you see him being not a little naive, you
Right.
know? And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to sell this stuff. And then you've got 10 older brothers
Right.
that probably range in who knows their ages, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know, it's just tough, man, you know?
You know, and I wonder if there was, and just from a strictly human perspective, I wonder if there's not a little bit of ego with Joseph, maybe, as a 17-year-old.
Think of a junior in high school
Yeah.
who says that his father gave him this fancy robe.
Yeah.
And here I am, and I got these dreams. You know, I mean, I just know myself whenever I was
Right.
a junior. I knew everything. I knew
Yeah.
what to do. I knew about this. And so then, I think what you're saying about kind of going back to the Jacob part
Yeah.
is like those 10 other brothers are like, what the heck? Like, why would Dad say that?
Right.
Hello, he's the 17-year-old. I'm 30-something. And who knows? One of them maybe 40 at the
Yeah.
time. I don't know how old the oldest one is, but it's just a jab and respect and tradition. And then you've got Joseph just being like, you know,
Yeah. Sure. You know, and we all go, you know, we all have to go through things in life to, you know, difficult times to end up to the person that God intended us to be. And I'm wondering if there was a little bit of ego there with him, and maybe this humbling, this humiliation he has to go through, God orchestrated for him to get to the place that he was. Because when we see him in Egypt, we see him as a righteous man, steadfast, went through a lot of bad stuff, and remained true, remained virtuous, remained righteous. Really was a great guy through it all. But yeah, I think it's possible that God orchestrated this to kind of humble him a little bit.
I think it's interesting too that it's Reuben that kind of steps up and
Yeah.
says, like, hey, let's throw him in the pit. And because, you know, we read last week that,
Right.
like, Reuben slept with one of Jacob's wives.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we know that there's like some animosity there. So like, in my mind, and I don't know, I'm not sure like the timeline or anything, because it's all like broken up and everything, but, you know, I don't know if this came after that, and this, you know, maybe he saw opportunity to mend that relationship between himself and Jacob.
Right.
Right, like,
Yeah.
hey Dad, look, all your other sons were ready to kill him,
Yeah.
but I saved him, and now I brought him back unharmed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, do you think we can be okay now, or whatever? You know, I don't know, but, and then I think too about how it's all being orchestrated by God.
Right.
You know, maybe, and again, I don't know any of this for certain, but, you know, like, it's not outside the realm of possibility that God put Reuben there and allowed that strife between him and Jacob
Mm-hmm.
for this purpose, right?
Yeah.
So that he had motivation to step in and save Joseph from his brothers. I don't know that, but you know.
Yeah, maybe there's a stirring in his heart now that, I mean,
Because without Reuben, they would have just killed him.
right, yeah, and you know, people have rough relationships with their parents. My parents are here. We have a phenomenal relationship. They're incredible people. They are. Not just saying that because they're here. Like I know people are not as fortunate as I am and have really rocky relationships with their parents, but I have to think at some point, like, there's a desire to mend that because it is your parent, it is your child. And yeah, maybe as we read last week that Reuben went through that so that Reuben could be at this point now. Because if they kill him, if he just stays in the pit, if he does not get to Egypt, there's a lot that's undone. There's so much that depends on that. So yeah, that's a great point.
You have to think too that like even the most faithful person that's, you know, faithfully resting in the promises of God is not going to see what comes next.
Yeah.
Like when God revealed to Joseph, hey, your brothers are going to bow down to you, and he's like, I believe it because God said it.
Right.
I highly doubt that he was like, well, first I'm going to get thrown in the pit,
Yeah.
then I'm going to go to jail. No, then I'm going to become a slave, and then I'm going to go to jail. And then
Yeah.
all these things will come true through our enemy.
Right. Yeah. That's tough. All right, moving on. Someone want to finish the passage out, verses 25 through 36.
Then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels bearing gum, balm, myrrh, and on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, what profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by. They drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. Keep going?
Yeah.
Okay. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, the boy is gone, and I, where shall I go? Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, this we have found. Please identify whether it's your son's robe or not. And he identified it and said, this is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son for many days. All of his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, no, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him to Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard.
All right, thank you. So Joseph sold into slavery. So we saw Reuben step in to save his brother's life. Judah now steps in, says, we can make a little profit off this, save ourselves from having his blood on our hands. Can you imagine what's going through Joseph's mind at this point? My brothers tried to kill me. They wanted to kill me. Reuben stepped in and saved me. They stripped this robe off of me, beat me up, threw me in a pit. Now they've sold me off. It's a really long trip from Dothan to Egypt. Could be riding in a cage. He could be walking in chains. There's a lot of time to think. How did we get to this point? How did my brothers get to the point where they wanted to kill me? He knew his brothers hated him, but, there's no way he could think that it actually came this far. It could get to that point. So then we see the brothers trying to deceive the deceiver, Jacob. As I said earlier, you remember back, Jacob put on the goat skin to deceive his father and steal the birthright, and now his sons are deceiving him with the death of his own son. And the irony there that Jacob, who once put on goat skin to deceive his dad, his favorite son's robe is now dipped in goat blood to deceive him. Just thought that was an interesting note. And so we see the initial event now of God's prophecy to Abraham with Joseph going to Egypt. And by the way, this was not a surprise to God. God was not sitting up in heaven and saying, they're about to kill him. Oh no, they're going to sell him. He's going to Egypt. Now what do we do? How do we get him out of this? No, the story is another instance of how sin is in turn used to fulfill God's purpose. The spectacular sin of these guys was used for the purpose of God, because the sin of Joseph's brothers led to the people of God eventually living in Egypt. As we see from there, the exodus from Egypt. The sin of the Pharisees and the Sadducees for the mother of Jesus led to the freedom from sin and death. God's plan will always come to pass. And these brothers had absolutely no clue what they were doing. They thought when they sold him into slavery and sent to Egypt that he was done, he was finished. They had no clue that they were in fact saving their own lives. As we know later on, a famine breaks out across the land. Without Joseph in Egypt, nobody's there to interpret Pharaoh's dream, to see the famine coming, to prepare for it. The famine spread across the whole land. It's very possible that the house of Israel dies. The Roman centurion who took part in the crucifixion and the murder of Jesus was eventually saved by it when he looked up and said, surely this man's the Son of God. Sinful acts still being used to fulfill God's purpose. So again, with Joseph in place, he rises to power, as we'll study later on. The famine breaks out. His brothers are starving. They're looking for food. They go to Egypt, and he offers them mercy and forgiveness, just according to God's plan. These brothers, through this act, did not realize they were saving their lives, and especially Judah. Because if we fast forward to the book of Matthew chapter 1 and read the genealogy of Jesus, we don't have to go far to see the name of Judah. The line of Christ is preserved because Joseph was sold slavery to Egypt. The gospel was preserved because Joseph was sent to Egypt. As I was studying this week, I found a lesson by Russell Moore on this subject, and how he put it was just so good. If Joseph is killed, for he's even just left in the pit, if he's not sent to Egypt, then he's not seduced by Potiphar's wife and flees. He doesn't end up in prison. He wouldn't have interpreted the dreams. It wouldn't have led to him being over the storehouses of grain, which would not have allowed the Israelites to go to Egypt and survive the famine, which means there would not have been an exodus, there would not have been a promised land, which means there would not have been an exile, which means there would not have been the survival of the people of Israel, which means there would not have been a Bethlehem, which means there would not have been a Jesus Christ, which means there would not have been a cross, which means there would not have been a resurrection, which means there would not have been the gospel. So this act, all the way back in the book of Genesis 37, centuries before Jesus Christ comes to earth, this act puts in motion so many other things that have to take place to get Jesus here. To get Jesus on the cross, to have the resurrection take place, and for us to have hope in anything. set in motion because of a group of really jealous and hateful brothers. Wanted to kill their brother. Man. Thank God that he protects his plan. He protects his prophecy. Anybody have thoughts or comments?
One of the questions posed to me recently was like, so if God is sovereignly working all these things out and knows all these things, like, kind of, what's our role in it? And I was thinking today as you were talking, it didn't have to be Joseph. It didn't have to be this way. It didn't have whatever. God can do it all on his own.
Right.
He doesn't really need human beings,
Yeah.
but he chooses us.
Yeah.
Despite our sin, despite our wretched, cold hearts,
Mm-hmm.
he chooses us. Like you said, Judah, pretty rough dude.
Yeah.
He's in the lineage of Jesus.
Yeah.
God chooses us, and that's all glory be to God for that, you know?
Yeah.
And so we see the beginning of like this beautiful gospel story here.
Mm-hmm.
And that points all glory to God. And thank goodness he allows us, he uses us. He
Right.
makes us useful to him,
Yeah.
which is wonderful.
Yeah.
You also see the mending of the family
Yeah.
in the end.
Yeah.
And you know, you have to, if you recall, God created the family.
Right.
And you know, that's the most, I don't know what term to use, but you know, that's the only thing Satan came to do was destroy the family.
Yeah.
That's his number one goal.
Yeah.
But you saw God mended that and brought it all back together.
Yeah, it's so beautiful, you know, that picture of them coming to Egypt, not even recognizing their brother. It's been 20-something years, and, you know, the forgiveness he offers them, and it's a beautiful, beautiful picture. Yeah. But no, to your point, Catherine, God does not need us. God invites us to partake in his plan. You know, who are we to be a part of that? Anybody else? Let's pray. God, we know you don't need us, and it's a very humbling thought to think that you would even choose to use us in your story. But we thank you for that. We thank you for the story here today. We thank you that you preserve your promise, that you preserve your plan. That you preserve your salvation. God, as we go from this place, I pray that we can rest on that assurance, that you preserve your people, and that you keep us for your glory. It's in your name I pray. Amen.